She didn't think. That was the thing nobody understood afterward. Mara didn't stop to calculate the risk or weigh the odds or decide whether a 68-year-old woman's life was worth more than her own. She just moved, and because she moved, she lived. And because she lived, everything changed. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. The Oak and Crown was the kind of restaurant that didn't advertise. You either knew about it or you didn't, and if you had to ask, the answer was already no. It occupied the ground floor of a converted brownstone on West 54th, and on a Tuesday night in late October, every table was full by 8 o'clock. The lighting was amber and low. The bar smelled like cedar and old whiskey, the kind of place where conversations happened quietly and no one looked at anyone else's plate. Mara Sloan had worked the evening shift there for 3 years. She was 22, 5'4", and had the particular gift of being invisible in a room full of people who wanted to be seen. She remembered orders without writing them down. She refilled water glasses before anyone asked. She smiled at the right moments and disappeared at the others. She needed the job. Her mother's dialysis treatments were running 4 days a week now, and Mara's older brother Theo had taken on a second job driving freight, which meant their mother sat alone in that clinic chair for 3 hours at a stretch, while a machine did what her kidneys no longer could. Mara split every shift tip with a purpose. 20 here toward the electric bill, 40 there toward next month's copay. There was no room in her budget for mistakes. She wasn't thinking about any of that at 8:47 p.m. when the front door opened and the woman walked in. The woman was older, late 60s, maybe early 70s, with silver hair pulled back in a knot so precise it looked architectural. She wore a black wool coat with a small pearl brooch at the collar, and she walked with the careful posture of someone who had once been told that a woman's bearing was her first introduction. She wasn't loud. She wasn't flashy. But every person near the door tracked her without meaning to, the way eyes track a lit candle. Her name was Ida Varro. Mara didn't know that yet. She just saw a woman who needed a table for one and looked like she hadn't slept well, and she crossed the room to greet her before the hostess could. "Good evening," Mara said. "Just yourself tonight." Ida Varro looked at her, really looked the way most customers never did, and said, "Just myself, yes. Near the window if you have it." Mara seated her at table 7, the corner window that looked out onto the wet street. She brought water and a menu and didn't hover. She came back 4 minutes later to take the order, a cup of soup, a glass of the house Merlot, and she noticed the woman's hands were shaking slightly when she handed the menu back. "Anything else I can get you?" Mara asked. Ida Varro looked up again. Her eyes were gray and very direct. "You remind me of someone," she said. "Someone good, I hope." The old woman smiled, just barely. "Someone I miss very much." Mara nodded and left her to it. That was the job. Know when to step in, know when to leave people alone. She was coming back from the kitchen with the soup when she saw him. He came through the side door, the one that connected to the private parking corridor around back. He was wearing a dark jacket and moving fast, and his eyes were already scanning the room before his second foot was through the door. Not the way a customer scans for a friend, but the way someone scans for a target. His right hand was low and close to his body. Mara stopped. Later, she would try to explain what happened in the next 4 seconds, and she never could do it in a way that made complete sense. She saw the gun. She registered where Ida Varro was sitting. She registered that the man's eyes had found the old woman and locked on, and then she was moving, the bowl of soup still in her hands, crossing the distance between the kitchen door and table 7 in a straight line. She got there first. She didn't know why. Some part of her brain she'd never had access to before simply took over, and she stepped in front of Ida Varro just as the first shot split the noise of the restaurant in two. The bullet caught Mara in the left shoulder and spun her sideways into the table. The glass of Merlot hit the floor. She didn't fall. She grabbed the edge of the table and stayed upright, which was probably the only reason the second shot missed her entirely and buried itself in the wall behind Ida Varro's head. The third caught her in the side, just below the ribs on the right. The fourth, as she was finally going down, caught her in the upper back. She hit the floor and the world went very quiet. She could hear Ida Varro's voice above her, steady, despite everything, the voice of a woman who had lived through worse than this and intended to live through this too. Don't you move, sweetheart. Don't you move. Look at me. Look at me right here. Mara looked at her, and then she didn't look at anything. Now, if you're new here, welcome to Mia's Romance Library. We tell the stories that stay with you. Hit that subscribe button and tap the bell so you never miss one. And if you want to know what happens next, you're going to want to keep watching. The name Luca Varro had appeared in 2 federal investigations, 1 state grand jury proceeding, and a notable number of city council meetings, where his name was never spoken aloud but seemed to hang in the air over every vote. He was 39 years old, dark-haired, and possessed of the specific kind of stillness that made people instinctively lower their voices when he entered a room. He had built the Varro organization from a regional operation into something that touched 6 states, and he had done it through a combination of ruthlessness and patience that his enemies consistently underestimated. He had one rule that was older than any agreement, any territory, any alliance he had ever brokered. His mother was untouchable. Not because of sentiment, though sentiment existed, buried under 20 years of discipline and scar tissue, because Ida Varro was the moral center of everything he had built, the one person whose judgment he still trusted completely, and because any man who went after Adon's mother had declared a kind of war that had no diplomatic solution. His phone rang at 8:51 p.m., and it was Marco, his second, and the first words out of Marco's mouth were enough. Luca was out of his car in 40 minutes. The restaurant had been cleared by then, police perimeter, ambulances, the particular controlled chaos of a scene that had too many moving parts. Marco met him at the barrier and spoke quickly and quietly. The shooter was down, taken out by one of Luca's men who'd been posted half a block away. Ida Varro was physically unharmed. There was a girl. What girl? Luca said, Marco told him. Luca was quiet for a moment. Then where is she? St. Vincent's. She was still breathing when the ambulance left. Luca looked toward the restaurant. Through the window he could see his mother sitting in a chair someone had brought her, surrounded by 2 of his men and a police detective who was learning the limits of what Ida Varro would and would not share. She was calm. She was always calm. It was the most terrifying thing about her. Take me to the hospital, he said. Mara woke up in stages. First there was sound, a steady beeping, a low hum of ventilation, the distant murmur of a hallway. Then there was light, filtered through her eyelids, warm and institutional. Then there was pain, which arrived all at once, and reminded her comprehensively about the shoulder, the side, the back. Then there was a presence. She turned her head, very slowly, and found a man sitting in the chair beside her bed. He was large in the way that a piece of architecture is large, not threatening in the moment, but suggesting unmistakably that the space had been designed around something with weight. Dark jacket, dark eyes, a face that had been arranged by someone who understood the difference between handsome and dangerous and had decided both. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't read. "You're awake," he said. His voice was low and even, the way you spoke in hospitals, because you'd learned that hospitals required it. "Apparently," Mara said. Her throat was dry. "Where am I?" "St. Vincent's. You've been out for about 11 hours. 11 hours. She tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. "My mother," she said, "has been notified. She's being taken care of." Mara looked at him carefully. "Who are you?" he said. "My name is Luca Varro. The woman you stepped in front of last night is my mother." The room was very quiet. "Is she okay?" Mara said. Something moved across his face. Not quite emotion, something more controlled than that, but adjacent to it. "She's fine. Because of you." Mara absorbed this. Her mind was still slow and cotton-wrapped from the anesthesia. The man with the gun has been dealt with. She had questions about what that meant, and she was wise enough not to ask them. "You didn't have to do that," Luca Varro said. His voice was still even, but there was something in it now, something that cost him something to say. "You didn't know her. You didn't know who she was or who I am. She was scared," Mara said simply. "I could see she was scared." That stopped him. He looked at her for a long moment. His hands, she noticed, were clasped tight in his lap. "My mother would like to see you," he said finally. "When you're strong enough, if you're willing." "I'd like that," Mara said. She closed her eyes again. She was so tired. "Your hospital bills," he said, "are handled. Your mother's dialysis, all of it, going forward, I've arranged it." Mara opened her eyes. You don't have to do that, I know. He stood. He was taller than she'd registered. I know I don't have to. That's the point. He left. She slept. Ida Varro came on the third day. She arrived at 10 in the morning with a small bunch of white dahlias and a paper bag from a bakery that Mara had never heard of, but which turned out to contain the best almond croissant she had ever eaten in her life. She sat in the same chair her son had occupied and folded her hands in her lap and looked at Mara with those direct gray eyes. "You're smaller than I remembered," Ida said. "I think adrenaline makes people look bigger," Mara said. Ida smiled. "A real one this time." "You could have died. I could have," Mara agreed. "Why didn't you just run? Every rational person in that room ran." Mara thought about it honestly. "I'm not sure I know how to answer that. I just didn't want to watch something bad happen to you if I could do something about it." Ida was quiet for a moment. Then, "Do you know what my son does for a living?" "I have an idea," Mara said carefully. "And does that concern you?" "It concerns me less than the fact that someone tried to shoot you in a restaurant," Mara said. "That concerns me a lot." Ida laughed, a short, real sound that lit up her whole face and made her look 20 years younger for just a second. "I like you," she said. "I'm glad," Mara said. "I like you too." Ida reached out and patted Mara's hand very gently once. "Luca is a good man," she said. "I need you to know that. I know what people think. I know what the newspapers have hinted at, what the rumors are. But I raised him, and I know what he is, underneath everything he's had to become. He is a good man." Mara didn't say anything. "He came to that hospital every night," Ida said. "He sat in that chair from midnight until the staff asked him to leave, both nights." Mara looked at the chair. "He doesn't do things like that," Ida said. "He doesn't sit. He doesn't stay. He has spent the last 15 years in constant motion, and I have been trying to get him to stop moving long enough to remember that he's a person." She looked at Mara. "You stopped him." "I didn't do anything," Mara said. "I was unconscious." "Exactly," Ida said. And she seemed to think that was perfectly sufficient. Mara went home 10 days after the shooting. She went home to find that someone, she had a strong suspicion about who, had arranged for her apartment to have been cleaned, for her mother's prescriptions to be filled for the next 6 months, and for the stack of medical bills on her kitchen counter to have been replaced with a single envelope containing a handwritten note. The note said, "These are settled. This is not a debt. LV." She stood in her kitchen for a long time, holding the note. Her mother, Sheila, appeared in the doorway in her housecoat, looking suspiciously well-rested. "That nice man called again," Sheila said. Mara turned. "What nice man?" "The one with the deep voice. He called twice while you were in the hospital to make sure I had everything I needed." Sheila paused. "He's very polite. For a man who sounds like he's in charge of something large. Mom, I'm just saying, please don't just say." Sheila smiled and shuffled back toward the kitchen. "He asked me to tell you he'd like to speak with you when you're ready. No pressure." Those were his words. No pressure. Mara looked at the note again. She called him that afternoon. Her shoulder ached. Her side ached. She was sitting in the good armchair with a cup of tea and her phone on her knee, and she dialed the number Marco had given her at the hospital, and Luca Varro picked up on the second ring. "How are you feeling?" he said. "Like I was shot 3 times, she said. 4, he said. 4. She'd forgotten about the back. "Right." She took a breath. "Mr. Varro, I need to tell you something." "Luca," he said. "Luca, I need to tell you that I'm not comfortable with this much. The bills, the prescriptions, the Mara." His voice was quiet. 4 bullets. She stopped. "You took 4 bullets for my mother," he said. "You didn't know her. You didn't know me. You had no reason in the world to do what you did, and you did it anyway, and she is alive right now, and you are alive right now, and I would like—" He stopped. She heard him exhale, carefully. "I would like to be allowed to do something about that, if you'll let me." She was quiet for a moment. "What kind of something?" she said. "Whatever kind you'll accept," he said. "Starting with dinner if you want. Somewhere that is not the Oak and Crown." Despite everything, she laughed. It hurt her ribs. She laughed anyway. "Somewhere quiet," she said. "Somewhere quiet," he agreed. He picked her up on a Friday. He drove himself. No driver, no Marco, no entourage. In a dark car that was both understated and clearly expensive. And he came to the door and rang the bell like a normal person. which apparently caused her mother to grip the kitchen counter for support. They ate at a small Italian place in Brooklyn that had 8 tables and no sign outside, and where the owner greeted Luca by name and with the particular deference of someone who had known a person for a very long time. They ate pasta and drank a wine she couldn't pronounce and talked for 3 hours. She told him about her mother's condition, about Theo and the freight job, about the 3 years at the Oak and Crown, and the regulars she'd come to know by their drink orders, and the way the late shift felt like a city within a city, all its own ecosystem after 11 p.m. He told her about growing up in the house his father had left behind, which had been too large and too quiet and had smelled like his father's cigarettes for years after, about learning the business before he understood what the business was, about his mother who had held everything together with both hands and never complained, not once, not for a single day. "She talks about you," he said. "Already?" Mara said. "I've met her once. She doesn't talk about many people. When she does, it stays." He turned his glass in his hands. "She said you remind her of herself at your age." "That's the nicest thing anyone's said to me in a while," Mara said. He looked at her. "It shouldn't be." She looked back at him. The owner brought dessert they hadn't ordered, small and sweet and warm, and neither of them said anything for a moment, and it wasn't awkward. It was the particular kind of silence that settles between two people when something has been acknowledged that neither of them has quite put into words yet. The weeks that followed were not simple. Luca's world had its own gravity, its own logic, and Mara was not naive. She knew what she was adjacent to. She knew that the man across from her at dinner on Friday nights was the same man who had, as he told her once, plainly and without apology, removed the threat against his mother's life with the same efficiency that other men reserved for quarterly reports. She knew that the settlement, those bills, had not been made with money that came from any place with a clean paper trail. She thought about it. She thought about it seriously, the way her mother had raised her to think about serious things. And then she thought about Ida Varro sitting across from her on a Tuesday afternoon over coffee, telling her about the first time she had met Luca's father, and the way Ida's whole face transformed when she spoke about love, not as a feeling but as a decision, as something you made over and over again, even when it was difficult, especially when it was difficult. She thought about a man who sat in a hospital chair 2 nights in a row because he didn't know what else to do with the weight of what someone had done for someone he loved. She wasn't looking for easy. She'd never had easy. What she wanted was real. It was 3 months after the night at the restaurant when Luca said it. They were in his kitchen, his actual kitchen, not a restaurant or a neutral location, but the kitchen of the house in Westchester where he'd lived for 12 years, and where Ida had a standing guest room, and where Mara had, somehow gradually, started to know where the coffee cups lived. He was making eggs at 10 p.m. because neither of them had eaten, and they'd both forgotten about dinner while they were talking. He had his back to her when he said, "I need to tell you something." "Okay," she said. He turned around. He was holding a spatula and he looked, for the first and only time she'd ever seen, uncertain, not afraid. Luca Varro wasn't afraid of things the way other people were afraid of things, but uncertain, like the words were not coming in the order he needed them. "I have not been careful with you," he said. She waited. "I told myself it was gratitude. In the beginning, I told myself I was honoring a debt, and that was easier to call it that, because the other thing is," he set the spatula down. "The other thing doesn't have a clean box. The other thing is that you walked into 4 bullets for my mother, and I sat next to you in a hospital and watched you breathe, and something." He stopped, started again. Something cracked open, and I don't know how to put it back. Mara was very still. "I'm not a safe choice," he said. "I'm aware of that. I'm not going to tell you the dangers aren't real, or that my world doesn't touch the people near me, because it does, and I won't lie to you. But I can tell you that there is no person on this earth who I would work harder to protect. No one I would go further for." He looked at her steadily. "I am asking you to let me." She thought about her mother, about easy versus real, about a woman named Ida who had told her that love was a decision you made over and over again. "Luca," she said. "Yes, your eggs are burning." He looked at the pan. He turned the burner off. He turned back. She was already crossing the kitchen. Ida Varro cried at the engagement dinner. Not dramatically, not with performance, but the quiet kind of tears that come when a person receives something they'd stopped expecting. She held Mara's hands across the dinner table and looked at her son, and then at this girl who had stood between her and a bullet, and she said something in Italian that Mara didn't understand. What did she say? Mara asked Luca quietly. He was quiet for a moment. His jaw was tight in the way it got when he was feeling something he wasn't prepared to name out loud. She said you walked into her life and broke it open, he said, in the best possible way. Mara looked at Ida. Ida was already smiling again, reaching for the bread basket, entirely composed, as if she hadn't just said something that would live in Mara's chest for the rest of her life. That was the thing about the Varro women Mara was learning. They said the truest things the most quietly. She reached across the table and took Ida's hand. Ida squeezed back, once, firm, like a promise. And in the amber light of a small room with people who had become, against every odd and every expectation, her people, Mara Sloan understood that she had not just survived the night at the Oak and Crown. She had walked through it into something else entirely. So here's what I want to know. If you were in Mara's shoes, would you have made the same choice? That split-second decision to step in front of a stranger? Drop your answer in the comments below, because this community has the best conversations. And if this story moved you, hit the like button. It means more than you know, and it helps Mia's Romance Library reach more people who love stories like this one. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next one.